we at one point we were marching, and they were pulling some guys out of line up front, and I was on the outside line, and they kept pulling them off, and I looked up and they was up there doing something. So the guy in front of me did not get pulled out, and I didn't. So we marched on up there, and we looked. There was a big bomb crater in the road, and they had built a little road around it, but they were trying to fill it up. And they had Americans up there shoveling, and on the other side they had Japanese with long bamboo poles. And when the Americans couldn't shovel anymore, they kicked them in there and buried them alive.
Cat-F. Welcome to World War II Live. I'm your host, John C. McManus, alongside my buddy Kevin Hymel. How are you, my good friend?
Hey, John. Tonight, I am the Mo to your Curly.
Mo to my Curly? Well, that means I'm going to be on the receiving end of some serious corporal punishment, I guess, so I better get my padding on.
I was going to go with the Kenneth Walker to your Sam Darnold, but I figured that's a football reference, and you are not a football watcher anymore, so I can't hit you with I can't hit you with a Super Bowl one. So we'll go with the two of the Stooges. But
Three Stooges, being male, coming of age when we did, you couldn't avoid the Three Stooges. So yeah, I mean of course,
speaking
alongside
of Third Stooge,
huh? What?
I said, speaking of Third Stooge.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I was going to say, we've got our third stooge who will be maybe in the Larry role, I guess, here. Would be our amazing, sagacious producer who is a lot smarter than the Stooges. But there he is, Mark Festoso, who keeps us on track. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing great. Hey, I'm super proud to be Larry. He was just one of my favorites. He was so great,
wasn't he?
He really was. And, here's the thing about Larry. He died in the 70s. I was a kid, and talking about boys loving the Stooges, my brother, who's a huge Three Stooges fan, and he was probably 13, he had a collection of books, and when Larry died, he put a sign over his bookshelf that said the Larry Fine Memorial Library.
What a tribute.
It really was.
That's a serious honor right there, man.
It is. Yeah, hey, so Stump the Chumps today. Yep. We got some great questions. We're going to really dive into some interesting people. But last week, if you missed last week's episode out there, we had a visual Stump the Chumps. We had a person send in this really odd, interesting Third Reich pennant, and we're trying to identify what the heck it is. So if you missed that episode, go back and check it out. Go to our YouTube site and check out the episode. What was the topic last week again, guys? Oh, it was Kevin's awesome The Real Fury.
Yes.
So Kevin wrote an article about the movie, the real version of the movie Fury. So go check that out. And in the Stump the Chumps, we have a picture of what this flag is. So we're looking for someone in the world to tell us what it is.
That's fantastic. And, just like the last episode, we're being sponsored tonight by the National World War II Museum. They are going to be hosting a symposium called Patton Man of War, March 13th and 14th. Yours truly is going to be there, and I've recently discovered I will not be on crutches. I will be off my crutches by then. But you guys know that, even 80 years after his death, Patton still looms large in the memories of World War II, and with good reason. And so, like I said, I'm going to be there. A lot of great historians are going to be there. We'll be on different panels talking about all elements of Patton, him in Mexico, World War I, World War II, and in between. And that's going to be at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans to be a part of this. And I encourage everybody to come. Go to National WW2, and as we like to do, the number 2 museum. So that's nationalww2museum.org to learn more, to get tickets. You can check out the itinerary, and I'm excited for anybody who comes. Like I said before, New Orleans in March is beautiful. The weather's great. It's a city of music and life and fun, and you're going to have a great time going. So with that in mind, John, we're actually going to be talking about sort of a darker topic tonight, and that is the Bataan Death March.
Yeah. So you so at the beginning tonight, you heard a first-hand account, a snippet from a first-hand account from the World War II Museum, from their amazing collection of oral histories, which I'd encourage everybody to go and check out. They're really accessible, and it's just any aspect of the U.S. in World War II you're going to find somebody to talk about it. So the guy you heard from there was Glenn Fraser from the 75th Ordnance Depot Company. And so obviously a survivor of the Bataan Death March, and then Camp O'Donnell, and so you'll hear these stories at times about soldiers getting buried alive during the Bataan Death March. And now it usually happen to Filipinos. What's unique about this account? This is an actual personal eyewitness account of someone who saw Americans buried alive, and just the thought of that is horrifying, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's horrible. And just to put perspective on it, so the Bataan Death March obviously is the result of the American and Philippine surrender in the Philippines to Japanese forces that have been fighting since December of 41. And the surrender, I guess, takes place, John, it's May,
April
correct?
9th. April 9th and 10th. Yeah,
okay,
so we need to distinguish. There's two different major surrenders that go on.
Right.
General Ned King surrenders at Bataan, and that's the folks who are going to be in the Bataan Death March. About a month later, on May 6th, General Wainwright surrenders Corregidor after the Japanese invade that island known as Corregidor. So if you were captured at Corregidor, you would not have been on the Bataan Death March. It would have been those folks taken in April.
Yep. And John, how long does the Bataan Death March last?
It goes on for the better part of a couple of weeks, because so the thing about it is, I think we tend to imagine in our minds like one cohesive column. It was actually like clumps of prisoners haphazardly moved along this road from Mariveles, for the most part, and other places in southern Bataan, all the way up the peninsula, and then to the middle part of Luzon, to a place called, I think, San Fernando, where they pick up trains. And that was not easy. In fact, sometimes for some of them, the worst part was the train ride, reminiscent almost of like the Holocaust train rides, because you had so many people packed aboard these train cars, and it was so hot. It'd be like 120, 130 degrees, and you're aboard that train for several hours, and then the ultimate dumping ground is a hellhole called Camp O'Donnell. So so where we were at any given time on the Death March, like at any, it really varies, and the treatment varies too. The other thing that I think it's important to remember about the Bataan Death March is, if the Americans and Filipinos had been in like good physical condition, it probably would not have been as deadly. The Japanese were not ready for how terrible the condition was. That these guys were starving. They were down with beriberi and other diseases. So they were not in good condition to make what was, in a sense, about a 50-mile walk, something like that. And then you combine that with the lack of Japanese planning effectively to deal with the prisoners, and their just wanton cruelty and disregard for any aspect of the prisoners' welfare. And all of that combines to make this as bad as it was.
Yeah, and the Japanese were not expecting the large amount of Americans and Filipinos. And John, we've talked about this before. I think it was Stanley Falk's book about the Bataan Death March. I read the Bantam book version for the 50th anniversary, and the real shock was that the majority of the prisoners making that march were Filipino. I think they made up two-thirds of the death march,
At least. So and they pay the price for it. So the final death numbers is about 600 Americans and about 10,000 Filipinos. And the Filipinos are on the wrong end of the only like deliberate executions, and what by that I mean take you out of the column, line you up, and shoot you or bayonet you kind of thing. Right. You don't have that in mass numbers all that much in many other spots during the death march for the most part, but for the Filipinos it happens, and also, as I mentioned earlier, getting buried alive. So the Filipinos actually get it worse than the Americans, and that's a pattern you're going to see in captivity as well. And it's really speaks to just this weird duality for the Japanese, because like Kevin, if you and I were Japanese soldiers who were part of that invasion force of the Philippines, I guarantee you we're going in there thinking we are liberators to liberate
Yeah.
fellow Asians from white imperialists.
Yep.
And I don't think we would have been briefed on the fact that there would have been Filipinos in uniform fighting against us, which is, the preponderance of the force. Again, about 2/3 of MacArthur's army is Filipino. So we would have been shocked by that and angry.
We would have been angry by it too. Here we're
Yeah.
why are we fighting you guys? You should be with us fighting these
Exactly.
imperialist Yankees. Yeah.
Yeah, and so what happens is you have this anger building up, whereas the Japanese authorities are saying, "Come join us. We're liberating you from the Americans," and yet the treatment of the Filipinos, in reality, is just absolutely horrible. And yet, if you could survive long enough to make it into a POW camp as a Filipino, it's very possible by later in 42 they're going to simply release you. Whereas obviously that wasn't going to happen for the Americans. So it's
Right.
a really weird deal there.
And the Americans would have a longer journey, all the way back to Japan and parts of China. But let's focus on this now. Some of the scenes I remember from my readings. I guess the other book that really left an impression on me. I think it was Don Fox. Was that Knox? There was a guy named Knox. Yeah, and and that was a real oral history of the march. It was one, couple of paragraphs from each person after another. And, some of the things that they spoke about, one was to save ammunition, that the Japanese would bayonet American prisoners who were not complying, or they would deliberately walk them by like small waterfalls, so they would hear the water, and all these guys are parched beyond any description, and the Japanese are not letting them stop and fill canteens or anything like that. It was just a torturous, existence from the get-go.
Yeah, so what they were doing, they had what were called sunning out treatments. So they would pack the prisoners together like in a field, and sometimes near artesian wells with water, probably like 60 yards away or something that we could see. So can you imagine the torture element of that? And it's the tropical sun beating down on you. And again, remember, you're in really rotten physical condition. And so anybody who makes a move for the water well is instantly shot or bayoneted to death or clubbed to death. That's another way they're killing people.
Yeah.
And then the other element of this too. And I know this is horrible. It's just a horrible topic. Obviously, we all accept that. It's going to be a dark thing we're exploring tonight. So, but my apologies. The big part of what's happening with the Bataan Death March is the Japanese are constantly moving people along because the Japanese soldiers are under pressure to get these guys up to central Luzon to a POW camp because they're really worried they're going to siphon off and filter off to join guerrillas, that they're going to fall out of the column. And so they're under pressure to do this, and these Japanese soldiers are not trained at all to handle prisoners. Some of them are like ordnance people. And so that means that we're having to walk along and move along constantly. And so if you have to have a bowel movement, and remember, many of these guys have dysentery, you've got to just keep going and just soiling yourself constantly. So you add that hellish nightmare to this, and it's also to humiliate them too. Anybody who falls out or stops is risking getting bayoneted or clubbed to death. The Japanese soldiers are stealing stuff from the Americans, rings and watches, and in some cases truckloads of Japanese soldiers are driving by, and soldiers hold out their rifles like as clubs to smash guys in the head as they're driving by. One Japanese officer has his sword that he's holding out, from a truck, and if you don't see it in time, he's going to behead you. I mean, it's horrible cruelty that becomes kind of standard in all too many cases.
And the prejudice is so deep rooted on both sides. There's just so much hatred from so much history between the two countries, United States and Japan, that that there's very few signs of kindness from either side. Of course, obviously the Japanese have all the cards at this point, but the cruelty is not just while we have these prisoners, it's we have these prisoners who we just hate. And we've been hating them for generations. So I think that really plays into it, and then, and what you see, I guess some of this, what you see on the American side is men learning how to survive, guys making deals with other guys, get me through this section of the hike and then I'll help you out in some way not a friendship thing, a very pragmatic way. Like some guy had I think it was a can of sardines, and he lent them to one of the guys. He said, "Okay, now you're going to owe me," and that's the survival that kicks into a lot of these Americans in this unforgiving atmosphere.
And also there were friendships too, in that guys looking out for one another, moving along. Maybe we're trucking along, and either me or you or Mark is saying I just can't carry on anymore, and then the other two are like, yes you can, keep going. Part of it too, that weirdly, the mortality rates tend to be higher among the younger soldiers. You would think they'd be better off because they're in better physical condition as young people, but they didn't necessarily have professional training as like with water discipline and field sanitation in many cases, and so it meant they were drinking anything they could out of any puddle by the side of the road. And so what was happening is they were drinking microorganisms that were weakening them. Parasites that were weakening them and making their dysentery that much more acute. Whereas some of the middle-aged professional officers, the field grade types, understood that you had to go thirsty for a while and it was worth it to wait until you could get some kind of cleaner water, and that made a difference. There's one guy in particular who I think is like one of possibly the most remarkable person on the Death March, Harold K. Johnson. Harold K. Johnson,
very famous person, yeah.
Yeah, and so he is, obviously an Army professional. He had been to West Point, I think, class of 33. And he's, a field grade. One of the kind of people I was talking about is in his 30s. And he had been an S3 and then a battalion commander in the Philippine Division. He had really kind of run his regiment in a way, but one of the Philippine Scouts regiments, I think the 57th. So on the Death March, as he sees things getting worse, and he sees so many people kind of just, Lord of the Flies, out for themselves, all this kind of stuff, he actually goes in the other direction. He gets more ethical, he gets more caring, he gets more spiritual. I mean, he's like praying constantly. He's having conversations in his mind with his wife, Dorothy. And he's looking out for everybody else the best he can. He's like the ultimate servant leader. And I think it's so fascinating to look at his example. And this is the way he's going to be through all of captivity. By the time he's done, at the end of the war, he's going to be down to like 90 pounds, something like that. Incredible that he survived. But the Bataan Death March for him is a kind of seminal moment in his life. He'd always been a good leader, I think, but now he really saw what leadership truly was about. And I think a number of people survived then and later because of Harold Johnson.
And, he's going to go on to become the chief of staff of the U.S. Army during Vietnam. And, there's the iconic story about him that I always think of with him is that at one point he realized that the Vietnam War was going the wrong way, and that he gets in a limousine and drives over to the White House. He's going to turn in his stars and tell LBJ this war is not the right thing, and then he changes his mind and says, maybe I think I can do more as chief of staff than resigning. And he said that he regretted that for the rest of his life, that he thought that for himself that was a break of moral courage. And that's just so tragic because you know what he went through, in the Bataan Death March. And John, you mentioned that whole element about the older officers having a little bit more stamina and wisdom, obviously, than the younger ones in your book. I think it wasn't Island, it was Fire and Fortitude, right?
Fire and Fortitude, yeah.
Yeah. And where did you come across that? Was that just from documents, or had someone else made that analysis?
So there were medical people who studied this at the time, and then, believe it or not, it's kind of interesting. Either the Army or I don't remember which institution kind of had a kind of systematic study of what happened to these guys in captivity. The Bataan Death March just being one part of it, Right. And that's the way it tended to skew, according to them. Now, I don't know that they've collected systematic data, but certainly anecdotal data was leading in that direction. There were also morale problems among the younger guys, too. They were just having a tougher time dealing with the adversity. Many of them are, 19, 20. They just got to the Philippines. They're kind of half-trained. And, of course, that's true of many of the young Filipinos, too. This is a shocking environment. The Japanese at this point are deliberately trying to break down the chain of command and trying to tell the officers, you have no further authority. Nobody has any rank. You're all, useless and worthless, because they looked
Right.
down on them for surrendering. So this was a leadership challenge, and so you had that, and then the POWs. It's one of the best documented parts of World War II. I'll tell you, so many of these guys who survived wrote memoirs, like unpublished memoirs. Many of them were West Pointers. A lot of that material is at West Point, fascinating in their archives. But a lot of them kept diaries at the time. Johnson's going to keep a fascinating diary, and the format of it was like a long letter to Dorothy, to his wife.
Right.
And he keeps it over the course of a couple of years. And then what's so poignant about a lot of these diaries, where we find out, what was happening in the Death March, is that, of course, as you mentioned, a number of these Americans eventually are going to be moved on from the Philippines later in the war, like 1944, to keep them from being liberated, and then sent to like Manchuria or Korea or Japan, to be worked as slave labor in Japan. So in many
Right.
cases, they buried their diaries, like, in secluded spots that they had pre-picked out, like at Cabanatuan and other camps. And so later, when the war's over, at their direction, the army comes and digs up these diaries, and
Wow.
it's so fascinating because it's
Yeah.
not then just personal property anymore. It becomes kind of government property too, like the Johnson diary. And so it ends up in the archives, the National Archives, but also like at Carlisle. I mean, you name it. So we know this experience extremely well, and the Death March especially. It's
Yeah.
very well documented.
And, America's going to learn about it because we didn't know anything about this. There'd been the defeat of the end of communication. But I think it was, and you know this better than I, an Army Air Forces
William,
officer.
William Dias, yes.
Yeah. So he escapes and makes it back to the United States. And he writes this, I think it really was all firsthand account of the Bataan Death March. And that is in like every newspaper in the United States. And
Yep.
if that doesn't motivate the U.S. military, the factory workers, the women rolling bandages and people in hospitals, my God, I've read that. I read the newspaper account one day when I was in college. I found it in the New York Times, and it was jaw dropping.
It
If you're not familiar with the conditions and everything. Yeah.
You and I have talked a lot about the Time Life series, that we read as kids, and
Yep.
it was so enthralling for us. That's the first time I remember seeing William Dias's account. It was just an excerpt from it. It wasn't the whole thing, but wow, was it moving and arresting, really. So
Yeah.
I've seen the whole thing, of course, since. And so what happened there is, he makes his way back to the United States. He's very lucky, as you might imagine. And for a while, the War Department and the Roosevelt administration did not want that information out there. They sat on it for the better part of a year or so. I think it's early 44, maybe, by the time we could. I could be wrong about that. I'm just going off the top of my head, but it was a
It was
while.
probably the time of a war bond drive. Yeah.
Maybe so, but they were concerned about what it could do for morale, for the family members of people in the Philippines who had been captured, and that's a whole other thing. There was this newsletter that the family circulated called Philippine Postscripts, and they would all share their news as they got it. It was like today, this would be a Facebook page or some other social media outlet where families would be in touch. In that day and
Right.
age, it was a newsletter, and then you had also ham radio operators in the United States who were picking up info from Japanese broadcasts, and sometimes prisoners were allowed to pass along info, and so this is later, after the Death March. But all that, my point is, all these shards of info are kind of filtering back to the U.S. plus U.S. intel, gathering information mainly from Filipino guerrilla groups as time goes forward. So we have a picture of what's going on, but it was a while before the Roosevelt administration was really comfortable telling the true realities of what had happened in the Bataan Death March. Fortunately, the vast majority do survive somehow. But I'd also point out the dying was only just beginning, because 1,547 Americans die at Camp O'Donnell between like April and July 1942, and I think probably at least 12 times as many Filipinos, something like that. Isn't that crazy?
And the account that he gave of Camp O'Donnell with one water spigot for thousands of prisoners and everybody standing in line, and the flies were just in clouds. So whenever you ate food, you had to wave your hand over your,
Yeah.
fork as you ate to prevent the fly. I mean, just the imagery that he portrayed of the cruelty. So, man, I mean, just
Ugh.
what a horrible thing. And I think it's really hard to find a good way to segue into talking about, the fact that we might not be stooges, but we are chubs. But John, any
You know,
any closing remarks that you
yeah,
have on
I
them?
do. I
Yeah.
do. I'd say the really dispiriting thing is that if you were on the Bataan Death March, in a way, your ordeal was just beginning, and so surviving that was tough enough. But what was coming in the next 3 months at Camp O'Donnell was really every bit as bad. And what would you be eating? You wonder, warding off those flies, probably rice gruel or like
Yep.
cracked rice. That's about it. So, and then of course, after that, you're on to Cabanatuan, and that's a survival experience too. Things get a little better by even mid 43 or so, partially because of Johnson, by the way. And that's a whole story we could get into another episode. But and of course, in the long term, maybe slave labor and all that. It's just really quite a staggering thing. And from the Filipino point of view, my last point is that it's possible you're going to be free, quote unquote, by the end of 42 if somehow you survive this horrible, horrible ordeal. And it's also very possible you're going to be a guerrilla for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So it's weird to me the Japanese kind of let these guys go to exacerbate the guerrilla problem that they already have. So they have a. So the Japanese have some humanity, and there are instances we could talk about on the Death March where there were moments of kindness the Japanese soldiers did, giving water. One guy had his West Point ring stolen, and a Japanese officer took it from who had stolen it and gave it back to the original guy. There were instances like that, but all too uncommon, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So,
And the last thing I'll say on it is, there were certain iconic experiences, times, events that people in the United States knew just from when you say it, like D-Day, Battle of the Bulge, Bataan Death March is there,
yeah,
and
everybody.
just the respect those veterans got when they came. If you said Bataan Death March, people would stop in awe.
Yep.
In the Army, I think, still does Bataan Death March marches and hikes every
In New
year to
Mexico.
commemorate. Yeah, it's not a forgotten thing. It's
And
something
people volunteer for it too. Everyday people too. So yeah, let me finish with this. This is what I meant to finish with.
Okay.
A young officer named Henry Lee, a young lieutenant. He had just deployed to the Philippines before hostilities, and he had written a kind of upbeat letter to his family several weeks before the Bataan Death March. And of course, he's in a horrible circumstance, but he had written this upbeat letter. He made it through the Death March, and he wrote a poem. So he had written the sunny letter. Now compare it with what he writes here. So now you are dead. The easy words contain no sense of loss, no sorrow, no despair. Thus hunger, thirst, fatigue combine to drain all feeling from our hearts. The endless glare, the brutal heat, anesthetize the mind. I cannot mourn you now. I lift my load, the suffering column moves on. I leave behind only another corpse beside the road. I mean,
very stark imagery. A lot of no vagaries there. That is very direct.
yeah, and he's kind of writing that for his lost comrades. That's my interpretation of it. Isn't that amazing? I mean, just wow. So, yes. Well, we knew
So-
it'd be difficult.
Now on to
emotional,
lighter topics, like
well,
the
we
fact
hope.
that we're chumps.
We hope of making us look like fools, which of course
Yeah.
is entertaining for a lot of people, just like the Three Stooges, I guess, right? So,
There we go.
Yeah.
So, Mark, what do you got for us?
Well, just before we start, I wanted to say that my experience with POWs, right? In 2016, I did a PBS documentary, Jeremiah Denton, and I'll put the link in the description. It's free; anyone can watch it. It's a hour-long documentary for PBS. And the interesting thing, right? He was famous because he was trotted out before the international press, and they were asking him questions about his captivity, and he's blinking. And he was blinking in Morse code the word torture. So you might remember that. So an amazing thing. But in thinking about his experience in the Bataan Death March, one of the big differences was that in Vietnam, when he gets thrown in the Hanoi Hilton, he's an early guy, right? They had this thing called the Code of Conduct, which the military wrote up, and it basically was expectations of how they were supposed to conduct themselves while POWs. And that was a huge help to them because they all came in knowing what was expected, and then they worked with that, and they worked with each other. And that came because in World War II in Korea, they didn't have it.
Yep.
And when you were captured in World War II, I think all you were told was name, rank, and serial number, don't do anything else. But what does that mean when you're forced to be a slave? You're forced to work until you're going to die, you know.
And they tell you officers have no rank anymore.
Right,
You know? Yeah.
right. So, you know.
Well, you know, Mark, that was actually something taught to the Air Force and the Navy. The Army didn't have the Code of Conduct. And so when the war ended, one of the POWs who had been in Vietnam, an Army helicopter pilot, was asked to be interviewed by Craigton Abrams, the chairman of the chief of staff of the Army. And he specifically said the Navy and the Air Force had this, and it really helped them. We need not only that code of conduct, we need that kind of training. And that's when the Army created what's called SEER training, and that's that POW experience that the Air Force does so well and things like that. So yeah, the military's had to learn through ugly and horrible experience, you know, how to support their war fighters that way.
Yeah. All right. Well, a grim topic, but quite interesting.
And real quick, Jeremiah Denton was portrayed by Hal Holbrook. It was a TV movie made called When Hell Was in Session, and I remember seeing that as a young kid, and the blinking and how they picked up that he was saying torture. Great. I really enjoyed that. That really stuck with me, that movie.
And he became a U.S. Senator.
He did. He became U.S. Senator from Alabama, for sure.
I know that he's buried in Arlington Cemetery. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a story, and the film that I did focuses on a lot on his family and the people he served with, because he had passed away when I was doing the film. So it gives a really interesting perspective on who he was and what he did. And
cool.
So check it out. This is a great story.
Yep.
All right, we're going to move on.
Time to humiliate John and Kevin now.
Yes, it is time. And I keep saying, you know, we got to have like John Parshall or Rich Frank on. And I think this makes me want to do it even more, just because I think I was reading in one of Ian Toll's books that the Japanese in the Russo-Japanese War, so like 1900, when they captured a lot of Russian prisoners and they treated them incredibly humanely.
Yep.
Ah.
Right. And so what's changed, right? Because they seem almost like crazed barbarians in World War II. So I'd love to talk to someone about that.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, we'll put that on the docket. Okay, let's get on to our Stump the Chumps. I love stumping the chumps here.
I don't.
All right, so we got some questions, and I've curated them to kind of talk about people. And the first one is from...
People are the worst.
Henry McGuire from Skytop, PA. Not sure what that is. He says, great podcast, my question. Jacob Devers was one of the best American generals in World War II, in my opinion, but forgotten.
But he's the guy from Pennsylvania, right?
Yes.
I'm gonna assume he's near York. Go on.
Could be.
Yeah.
He says, 4-star general, first ETO commander, recognized deficiencies in tank destroyer concept doctrine and pushed for upgunned and up-armored Shermans, led the 6th Army with a standing record, but hated by Eisenhower. What gives? Please give him some love. All right, Devers, what do you say?
Favorite son of York, Pennsylvania. He needs more scholarship. There was like a little thin book I found on him, like The Man from York, I think it was called. He didn't really do a lot oral history-wise after his retirement, but, you know, a very competent commander. Patton, I think, kind of had a love-hate relationship. He would confide in Devers a bit, quite at Fort Myer before he headed off across the seas. But he was an armor expert. You know, he was the guy back in the United States making these decisions, figuring out what was best. And then he gets to Europe, and he basically has to work with Eisenhower or Bradley to divvy up Patton's former 7th Army staff, because Patton wants them as part of 3rd Army, And you're like, no, I need experienced officers and staff members for both my Army group and for the new 7th Army under Patch. And really, he leads a almost flawless campaign. I mean, there's no big embarrassments. They face some of the same problems as the other Army groups when it comes to fuel, as they get to the German border. And famously, and John, you can speak to this better than I can, reaches the Rhine River months ahead of everybody. But I think he wasn't part of Eisenhower's clique. I think Eisenhower was comfortable with the men that the officers he had underneath him in North Africa and Sicily and the first few months of the European campaign. And I think he wanted to pick who would be the other Army group commander. And that decision was made by Marshall. And so I think he had that going against him. And it just never really synced up. I think Bradley, because of where he physically was closer to Eisenhower and they could meet, where Devers is in southern France, coming in, through southern France. So there wasn't that same communications line. No, I think Devers deserves a lot of love. He's one of the reasons we win World War II. John?
Absolutely solid commander, quality commander. So there is some scholarship on him. A guy named Scott Wheeler has written a real biography of Devers.
Good. Okay.
I highly recommend that to anybody. It's good. It's well researched, and you'll really get to know Devers pretty well in that book. So this is the interesting thing is that this is one of the very few people Eisenhower doesn't get along with. He gets along with practically anybody, as we know.
Gets along with Montgomery.
But he dealt with Montgomery, and
he outwardly got along with him.
Yeah, I mean,
he
had a
seethed on the inside.
Yeah. Well, of course, like everybody who dealt with Montgomery. I mean, they seethed on the inside at some point, didn't they? I think Eisenhower handled him pretty well. But he and Devers just clash for some reason. They don't work. It just doesn't work. And also, by the way, Devers clashes with Mark Clark big time. Anytime, it's actually worse. So whenever Devers encounters Mark Clark, it's just like, button heads. It just completely degenerates at any point.
That makes you like Devers all the more.
It's not quite that way with Ike. I mean, Ike, I guess on the surface gets along with him okay, but he doesn't have a particularly high opinion of him. And they just don't mesh very well. And it is a little bit of a weird dynamic in that Devers, is the main commander of the invasion of South France, and so that's kind of an independent operation, not under Ike's control at that point, but eventually his army group will be under Ike's control, weirdly, So, but one of the things that's to Devers' credit, he's in command of an entire French army, too. And no other American commanders can say that in World War II, to my knowledge. And so he's got 7th Army, U.S. 7th Army. He's got the French 1st Army. And I think he's going to, I think you're right, Kevin. I mean, he guides that with a very steady hand.
Yeah.
But he's kind of solid but unspectacular, kind of like William Simpson, the 9th Army commander. He also doesn't get the love he deserves, I don't think. We're fortunate to have some pretty solid Army commanders. And when you really line them all up, though, because Sandy Patch was good, too, then you look at Courtney Hodges, and you're like, goodness gracious. One of these things is not like the other, especially compared to Patton, too, obviously, who's outstanding, as we know. But, I think it's a really good point. Jacob Devers is a kind of overlooked guy. I've never quite parsed out exactly why he doesn't get along with Ike. I just know that they didn't, and so Ike tended to kind of freeze him out a little bit.
Yeah, it's like Eisenhower's head of the Mean Girls Club, and Jacob Devers was on the outside looking in.
From that perspective, I guess from a Devers perspective, but maybe there was something deeper that we don't know about that never survived to history. But I think maybe the person who would know it better than anybody is Wheeler, who wrote the biography of Devers. And
I'm really glad about that.
Yeah, I am too. The book came out about 10 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, I was doing research into Devers long before that, and I went up to York, where his papers were, and was going through like the oral interviews and stuff. And, there was nothing that stood out where he was accusatory of anyone or anything like that. Now, obviously, he's probably older and mellowed, but I could see where Wheeler really had his work cut out for him, because Devers was not a Patton where he left tons of papers and letters and diaries and things like that. He was busy doing his job,
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. And like I said, a York, Pennsylvania guy. So I think our friend Julian has probably crossed paths with a few Devers streets or circles or something like that. And so I'm really glad he sent us
This
that
wasn't
question.
Julian. This was somebody else.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who was the person that asked the question, Mark?
Henry McGuire.
Oh, Henry. Henry. Thank you, Henry. We appreciate the question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. All right. Well, that was a good. I'm a fan of Devers, so I'll give you good credit on that one.
I think being a fan of Devers is like saying, that amateurs look at battles, experts look at logistics.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
amateurs, they all love just Patton and MacArthur. Where the experts, they like the Devers and the Patches and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The ultimate
Well,
amateur is like a Patton biographer. I think that's
Yeah. All you need is that GED to do something like that.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Like, oh my God, not another Patton book. Jeez.
yeah. What more is there to say about Patton? I know.
Nothing new to learn there.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I'll have to pick up that Devers book. That sounds good.
Yeah,
But
that's
it strikes me too. The American Army, after it's breaking out of Normandy and it's pressing on to the Reich. I mean, what a machine it was, right? And at that point, the Army, I think, had mainly worked out like who the good people were to put in the right positions.
Yeah,
Wouldn't you say, for the most part? And like Devers is one of those guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you have the
Yeah.
trial by fire in North Africa, Sicily, and in the
Right.
Pacific. You also have, these important commands in the United States trying to figure out what kind of equipment we're going to use. And my God, and it was such a modern army for its time. I mean, the Soviets were surprised to find out. They thought every infantryman had their own Jeep.
But it was, and because it was the most automated military force of all time
Yeah.
up to that point.
Yep.
For sure.
No horsies there.
No.
Horses
Well, and you
were
think of it,
gone, even for the First Cavalry Division.
and all the when they go home and they start having kids, right? The baby boom, like all of those kids are going to get cars.
Oh
right,
yeah.
at that point.
Oh yeah.
Right? And that's really what's happened. Like it's
Well, that's
just
all their parents had cars. That's why the army worked so well. They all knew they were all mechanics.
Yeah,
You
there's
know?
some stat that the U.S. was like, when you think about like number of cars per person, the population, the U.S. by far had the most cars of any country on the planet. Germany, I think, had like one car per 40 or 50 people, something like that.
Yeah.
So way behind.
My sister's father-in-law was Admiral Thomas Moore, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs under Nixon, and I used to talk to him about World War II stuff. He was there at Pearl Harbor when it was attacked, and he said before he went into the Navy, he loved tinkering with cars, and he said when the Japanese attacked, we knew we were going to eventually win. We were just so mechanized. So, all right, I've rambled on too long. Next humiliation.
it's all good. Okay.
All right, next one.
All right. So this one comes from the UK, and this is from Julian Delic.
All right, Julian.
That's where the name comes from.
That's where it comes from. So he says, excluding senior officers, do you know of any U.S. soldier who served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam? I'm wondering if, for example, an NCO might have served across these conflicts. If so, have any memoirs or other material been published? I just wondered what the seasoned veteran might have made of the change in armed conflict and attitude to the reasons for fighting over these wars. Interesting.
So, right off the bat, I can say, that I might not know a specific name, but I can tell you that at Arlington Cemetery, there are so many headstones that say World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Now, does that mean they fought in all three? I don't know. If you served during that time, in the Vietnam era, but we just had a guy. What was his name? Severio. He was a Puerto Rican. He joined the army in Puerto Rico, and he was training in Hawaii when the war ended. Comes back, joins the Army Reserve, and then joins the Buccaneers, the 65th Infantry Regiment in Korea. Fights with them for a year, earns a Silver Star, a Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and then comes back, and then he's as a colonel, he's in charge of recruitment in Puerto Rico. But we're talking about people that fought. So, John, thoughts?
Yeah, let me tell you a little story. It's a great question.
Okay.
First off, about what I consider to be one of the most exclusive clubs on the face of the earth, and that is 3-time recipients of the Combat Infantryman Badge. So there are some of them, but we're talking about a handful of people. I think it's in maybe low three figures, something like that. I could be wrong, but it's small. And so, when we talk about people who actually fought in these wars, it's, a pretty select group. Just think about that a minute. World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and in all three of those conflicts, you're on the sharp end to the point where you get the combat infantry badge. So I knew a guy who fit that category. His name was Lou Schindler. I once met him. I talked to him extensively. He was a cotton baler, a 7th Infantry Regiment guy. Which also makes him great, too, obviously, as we know. But so Lou had fought in the Philippines in World War II. And then he had fought with the cotton balers in Korea, and then fought with a different unit in Vietnam. And that's probably the way it would have happened, And he was an NCO, so very much at the sharp end. It's absolutely amazing to me. One of the most amazing people I've ever met, but you'd never know it just by, encountering him. He seemed like anybody else, but he really wasn't. So when I think of those 3 war veterans, yes, there are a number of veterans of 3 wars. Who probably have different MOSs at given times, and especially by the time they're in Vietnam, they're in maybe more senior positions that are a little bit safer, like maybe a sergeant major, who's maybe been on the sharp end in World War II and Korea. There aren't too many people who were really, in frontline combat in all 3. But I think when I got the question, that's the first thing I thought of, is that exclusive club of the three-time CIB recipients.
Right. John, there's another one that I actually knew. At the time, he was retired, General Frederick Crozen. He was a company commander. I want to say, God, he's right at the end of the. What's the army patch? He's in Germany. It was like a sword with flames. It was like this. I want to say 68.
ASTP?
No, it was a numbered division. Anyways, he was a lieutenant. He was a lieutenant with that unit. I remember him telling me that some German tanks came at him in like April of 45, and he said, we were told there was no gas left in Germany. Fights in Korea, fights in Vietnam, and I think he was a battalion commander in Vietnam. But he, on his briefcase, he had his CIB with the 3 stars above it.
Wow.
And what he's probably most famous for is he was a European commander, and he was visiting a post in Germany in the 1970s. And him and his wife were leaving the military base, and she was sitting next to him, and he would get so mad because all the stories said he was in a limousine. He's like, it was a Lincoln Continental, it wasn't a limousine. And a German rebel of a faction that didn't want the American army in Germany jumps in front of the Lincoln Continental and fires an RPG. And it went through the front window, and it embedded between him and his wife, and shattered glass and everything. And he said he thought he was dead, and his wife put her hands in her head in her hands, and she went, oh God, oh God. And when he heard her say that, he realized he was alive, and he yelled at the driver, hit the gas, hit the gas, hit the gas, and they drove off, and that saved them. And I mean, so a guy who saw action in 3 wars and the Cold War in the 1970s, General Crozen. And then John, yeah. And then John, what about David Hackworth? Would he count? I think he was Merchant Marine.
Not in World War II. He was too young. He joins the Army underage at 15, I think, in 1947, if I'm remembering correctly.
I thought he was in the Merchant Marine and went to some of the islands in the Pacific.
Really? Well, maybe.
And he tagged along with the Marines when they would go hunting for the Japanese stragglers after islands had been secure. I remember reading that in About Face. And then I guess he's an enlisted guy. Is he enlisted or an officer in Korea?
He's enlisted. He's an NCO. So he joins the Army as a private, an underage private. And then, by the way, he's also in the Berlin crisis in 1948 during the blockade. He's with the unit we're mobilizing to go maybe into Berlin. It doesn't happen. You know who one of his mentors was? Glover Johns. Glover Johns. Clay Pigeons of St. Lo,
Yes, yep.
So anyway, so then, in Korea, he's with the 25th Infantry Division. I think the 27th Infantry Regiment, Wolfhounds. And then, obviously, in Vietnam, he's, both an advisor and battalion commander. Incredible record. Absolutely incredible. But you may be right. He would have been really young as a Merchant Marine person.
Yep. So that's the best I can do.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
All right, you guys missed someone big.
Who?
Command Sergeant Major Basil Plumley.
Oh, Plumley. Yeah,
Right.
that's right. Yeah, good
Is
point.
he? Is he first? Is he the 7th
Yes.
Cav with?
Yeah. Well, he starts 82nd Airborne, Sicily, Salerno, Normandy, Market Garden, and then he does 187th Airborne Infantry Regiment in Korea.
All right.
And then 7th Cav at Idrang Valley, and portrayed in the movie We Were Soldiers Once and Young.
By the Marlboro Man.
By the Marlboro Man. Right. The guy that plays Sam Elliott, right? Sam Elliott. So, I don't know if he left a memoir, because Julian's asking about a memoir, but certainly there's probably stuff about him in We Were Soldiers Once and Young. So
and also too, I'd encourage Julian to check out the book, the subsequent book to that, We Are Soldiers Still, in which you get to know Plumley a little bit better, actually, because it's all about how he and General Moore go back to Vietnam in multiple trips, and what a big part of that Plumley was. So as far as published memoirs, there aren't many I can think of. Yeah.
So Crozen wrote something, and I think it was published by AUSA, Association of the U.S. Army. So you might, if you look up General, what was his first name? Frederick Crozen? Yeah, Frederick Crozen. You can, you should be able to find his memoir, and then of course About Face by David Hackworth.
Yeah.
So that's the best I can do. And Mark, that was impressive that you just thought of Plumley off the top of your head and didn't Google like 3 words.
Well, no, I Googled the information, but when I read the question, he did pop into my head, because there's some great lines in the movie where he's talking about, when Mel Gibson introducing him, right?
Yep.
He's trying to impress all the newbie shaved-tail lieutenants, and Sam Elliott comes in with a no bullshit attitude, and he's like, he lists his resume. He made all 3 combat jumps in World War II, all that. So pretty awesome.
Amazing.
So what a lucky unit that was to have a NCO with experience in Vietnam, World War II, and Korea. And if it was an airborne unit, you'd be so happy. Just you'd want to sit around and listen to him talk.
It's amazing.
That is so true. Yep.
Yeah.
But good research, Mark. Okay.
Thank you. Love it. All right. So I'm going to give myself good marks for that one.
For Googling.
It's a very above board process.
That's right. All right.
Siri.
Actually, John Parshall would call that, real-time history.
So
that was some real-time
Googling. Yeah.
That's right.
Hey, Siri.
All right. So Robert Austin from Richmond, Virginia has a question.
Robert. Richmond. Good man. Virginia man. All right.
In reading about World War II in the Pacific, I get the sense that by far the preponderance of high-tier medals awarded by the U.S. Navy, and he's talking about Medal of Honor, Navy Cross, Silver Star, DSM, went to officers. A cynic might say that a possible reason is that it was officers doing the citing of other officers' exploits at the expense of many heroics of enlisted men. What are your thoughts?
I disagree. I recently did a big tally of over 400 American recipients of the Medal of Honor, and I didn't see a big shift towards enlisted or officers. Now, remember, a lot of guys who earned the Medal of Honor as enlisted, some of them stayed in and did become officers. But the one thing I remember, I was reading a memoir of a Marine who fought at Okinawa, and he was saying that he didn't believe in any medals because he said they're so subjective. And it really wasn't about who got them. He talked about this one Marine that nobody liked in his unit. And the guy dove on one grenade and pulled another grenade under him and took the impact of 2 grenades and saved his unit. But nobody liked him, so nobody wrote him up for the medal. So I haven't seen that element of a leaning towards officers over enlisted. But reading that account was kind of chilling because you'll never be able to quantify that, or find statistics of who deserved. Now, granted, in World War II, a lot of African Americans and Japanese Americans who were due to receive medals of honor and other things did not receive them. And in the 1990s, the military went and looked back and realized, oh my God, these guys deserve Medal of Honor, Silver Star. They upgraded a lot. Thank God for that bit of justice. But John, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, along those lines, Latinos too, by the way.
Yeah, yep, yep.
But I mean, along those lines, there's no question that if you're a white officer, ranking officer of some kind in the Navy, you've got an advantage in terms of medals. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But I'd also say, when you're the skipper of a ship, I mean, you have ultimate responsibility and purview for everything. And there is a tendency for hands-on leadership in moments of crisis for the skipper, and the idea of going down with the ship. And some people do that, some of these skippers, and also other officers too, in positions of responsibility, not just staffers, but like the gunnery officer or something like that. I mean, they are living it, in terms of the servant leadership too. So I would not necessarily say they don't deserve it, but I think Kevin's point is a great one in that, I mean, for every one person who's decorated, there's probably 3, 4, 5 others who might have done something of the same kind of thing and nobody saw it, or maybe they died, and or like you said, maybe nobody likes them, or they're the wrong color, or I mean, a lot of different variables to this. There's no question officers would have had an advantage in getting medals, and this of course creates resentment, quite understandably so, and to the point where there's a kind of reaction against that going forward in some cases, where if you have enough rank, you're not getting decorated, and so, like, by the way, I mentioned the CIB in one of the previous questions. Initially, generals were not to get the CIB, and so only colonels and below. Now, eventually, that changes somewhat. So the military service has kind of pushed back against this problem of over decorating of officers, because there's careerism too that comes into play, for some people.
Yeah.
But my feeling is, and it's only my opinion, most of those who are, conferred with high decorations like the Navy Cross, or the Medal of Honor or the Silver Star, among naval personnel, most of them really did earn that, and because there's a lot of good accounts that go into that, pretty decent documentation that they have. That you and I have seen that kind of stuff. So, but that's only my opinion.
Yeah, and the Medal of Honor has really gone through quite the evolution. I mean, in the Civil War, you would get it for capturing an enemy flag. Soldiers earned the Medal of Honor at the Battle of Wounded Knee, which was really a slaughter of Native Americans. And there was an incident in Veracruz, Mexico, that Marines and Navy Navy sailors, they weren't all officers, they go ashore and they came under fire. So this is like October 23rd, 24th, I want to say like 1912 or 1914, before World War I.
1914.
Yeah, and every single one of these like 20 to 40 guys got the Medal of Honor. And I had to read through all of them, and it's like, who acted bravely while running across a street to a defensive position. It was just the most like, oh my God. And so, of course, now, in World War II, too, you needed 3 witnesses, to your act of courage. And to my knowledge, the only case where it was not 3 witnesses was a Vietnam War soldier named Rocky Versace, who was a POW. And the person that witnessed it was a guy named Nick Rowe, a lieutenant. And they made the exception because there weren't enough people to witness. And what, Nick Rowe said was so profound, and how he kept morale up among the POW. They were all captured together. I think it was in 64, 65, that he kept everyone's morale up, and very decidedly earned the Medal of Honor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, no doubt. So,
Mark, how we do?
I don't know how we do in that one. That's
Okay. Yep. No. The problem with soldiers, Marines, and sailors and airmen is they're human beings, and they're subjective, just like everybody else.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, no doubt. Yeah, Kevin, what you?
Well, let's see. I'll give you a small update on a personal level. As you know from our last episode, I was helping a neighbor get the ice off of her vehicle and fell and broke my leg. And so I had surgery. I've been off my leg on crutches for the last week and a couple of days. And so Monday I went to the doctor and he x-rayed. I think I've got 8 screws now in my fibia, which is the smaller bone in your shin, next to the big bone. And I will be up and about in 4 weeks. The good news is I'll be up and not on crutches by the time I go down to New Orleans. So that's my personal update. Now, on a professional level, I can tell you that I have spent part of my convalescence editing the manuscript of Volume 3 of Patton's book. And so I just sent in my edits yesterday, and I was happy because I had got that behind me, and I can sit back and read a book. And, of course, they sent me the corrected manuscript today. So I can't really relax. But I figured that people watching us on YouTube, I was going to give you a sneak peek if you want to read the book. So there you go. There. So just hit pause a lot, and you can read the book before it's even published.
Pirated.
And so I think just the writing, we're at, just about 450 pages. So, it's scheduled to come out June 22nd. You can bring it to the beach and read for hours and get a great suntan.
And it's
John?
available for pre-order now, isn't it?
Yes, you can get it off of Amazon or go to University Press of Missouri or University of Missouri Press and find it on their website. They did a great mock-up of the cover and everything for me when they were first putting it together. It was funny because they said, "What do you want to be the cover?" I said, "I don't know. You people are the professionals." And I sent them about 100 photographs of Patton, and they picked something I never would have thought of, and they cropped it perfectly, and I think it's a great-looking cover. So
that's awesome.
Thank God for professionals. John, what about you? Whatcha?
It's awesome. Well, I want to say preliminarily, conceptually speaking, we've always felt that you had a screw loose. Let's hope that it doesn't break your leg.
Now they're all tightened.
Let's hope they're tightened. Won't be like the rest of you with a screw loose that we wondered about. But yeah, so what am I up to? Well, a lot of times we talk about the process of our research and like ongoing things and how sometimes you and I have talked about this many times, how sometimes there's a really cool find that you didn't necessarily expect. So along those lines, there was a guy who served on Ridgway staff when he was NATO commander in 1952 and 53. He was a Naval Reserve officer and working in like the public affairs office. He was a journalist in civilian life. And interestingly, after he got out of the Navy, he came home and he went to Georgetown and wrote a master's thesis all about how like NATO and Ridgway's command worked at that time, and like his experiences with Ridgway and his impressions about him. Now, this thesis is really quite rare in that there's only one copy of it from Georgetown.
Wow.
So I had to work with the folks from my library at Missouri S&T. Katrina Bailey there is absolutely just an incredible person, does a great job. So she worked with a guy named James Pape at Georgetown University Library, and they were able to get that to me. It's library use only, so I have to like be in the library to get use out of it. But it was really neat. I got it this week and had a chance to dive into it this morning. There's some really cool stuff in there, personal stuff. For instance, so Monty, I think I mentioned this to you before, Monty Montgomery was Ridgway's deputy, and
Right.
not always too happy about being the second fiddle, obviously. He lived in actually a nicer chateau than Ridgway. He lived in this sumptuous chateau where he'd have these big receptions, and Ridgway's were kind of more bare bones, and Ridgway lived in a really nice place, don't get me wrong. But the Supreme Commander is in a chateau that's not as nice as the Deputy Commander. I mean, that is so Monty, isn't it?
Yep.
I just think that's funny.
John, isn't that just like one of the best parts of what we do is finding a source we didn't even know existed and being able to mine it for the juicy gold nuggets. When I was working at Fort Leavenworth, they dissolved my Afghan study team and put me in the Frontier Army Museum. And we had volunteers that would work the front desk and everything. And one guy was a retired colonel. And I told him I was researching this book on Patton, and one day he just comes in and he hands me John Wood or Jack Wood's memoir that is unpublished. This is the commander of the 4th Armored Division who, is just this brilliant armored commander that Patton eventually has to relieve. And here I've got his handwritten first-hand account of everything. And man, it was fantastic.
So cool, isn't it? Yeah.
Yep.
That's just what makes research and writing a lot of fun. Just when you're constantly chasing down, when you can provide more details, when you can answer questions you couldn't,
And have people get excited that we're doing this work. We're not sitting around watching TV. We're trying to accomplish something, and they want to help us. That's the real magic of it. It's like, when I would be researching in the archives, like Tim Nenninger, one of the best archivists in the world, really, he would just come over to the table. He's like, oh, I found this box of stuff on Patton. I thought you'd want to look at it. Thank you so much.
Those are the key people. I mean, they're amazing. They know things we don't. And that's why I wanted to specifically mention the individuals involved here, because they didn't have to go out of their way to make this happen. And Georgetown could have said, "No, this is too valuable. We can't let that go to you." And yet they were able to work with us, and we'll take great care of it. No problem there. I'm just happy to have access to it. It's just part of the fun of what we do. So anyway, that's what I've got.
Real quick, I hate to say this, but I got to imagine too. They're like, "Wait, John McManus wants to look at it? Okay." Your name has cachet, whether you want to admit it or deny it. But you've written so many books and done so much work in our field that's so high caliber that they were probably honored to be part of your next book. Blech, I said it.
I know it hurt you to say that, so I do appreciate it. But no, I hope when they heard my name, it wasn't like infamous, that they thought of that. So
not like my name.
Right, exactly. That's my concern. But,
the guy who has 8 screws loose, yeah.
Well, we hope those screws aren't loose. We know screws up here are loose, But, no, it's absolutely awesome. But so. Anyway, we have reached the end of the trail for this particular episode. I think we really covered a lot of ground, literally, in a way, like we usually do. I want to just remind everybody, please subscribe on our YouTube channel. We want to buck up our subscribers that much more. Like, share, comment. Give us comments on YouTube and elsewhere. Of course, send us Stump the Chump questions at worldwar2live@gmail.com, and that's what the Arabic numeral 2, again, worldwar2live@gmail.com, and just keep helping us do what we do, because we're having a blast and really, really, really enjoy being in touch with you and hearing from you. So, gentlemen, this has been terrific again. Thanks so much for your vast intelligence, which, of course, goes without saying how amazing that truly is. So
you're talking to Mark, I know.
Yeah, I'm mainly directing those comments to Mark, but I figured I'd sort of include you. But no, seriously, great stuff, great job all the way around. Thank you all, one and all, for joining us, and Roger out.